Yeah, ask me about it.
Okay. So first you mentioned that you have experience working in
Yeah, the first
nuclear
couple of
power.
years when I was working for the utility company, the electric company, before coming here, um, I worked. Some of my work was associated with Peach Bottom Nuclear Atomic Station, which is on the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania, and some of my work was associated with Limerick Nuclear Power Plant. The first one, Peach Bottom, was already built and operating, and the second, Limerick, the company was just building. So I was involved in some of the design review for that. Um, they're about 1,000 megawatt reactors. There's two of them at each site, two 1,000 megawatt reactors. And just to put that in context, at Princeton University, our average electric demand is about 16 megawatts. So 16 compared to 1,000, right? They're enormous. They're, probably a few hundred acres per location to make 1,000 megawatts. But by comparison, our solar field, we have a large solar field that takes up 27 acres. All right. We make 4.5 megawatts when it's sunny out. All right. So if I go up by a factor of 100, from 27 acres to 2,700 acres, 2,700 acres, I could easily put, two 1,000 megawatt reactors. So I get 2,000 megawatts versus, the scale, the energy intensity is much, much higher with a nuclear power plant than with solar.
Yeah, because you're
Renewables,
talking about 2,000 versus 400, right? If it's 4.5 megawatts
Yeah,
for 20.
exactly.
Sorry, I'm trying to keep all the numbers straight.
No, that's exactly what my point was. That
Yeah.
if I go up by a factor of 100, I could fit maybe, yeah, 450 megawatts on that amount of land. Where if I go up by 100, I could easily fit 2,000 megawatts on the nuclear plant land. I'm not avoiding the issues of rad waste disposal and the potential for various nasty things that could happen if you take uranium or plutonium and either release them into the environment or expose people to them.
Do you think that we
But
should?
before we get to the next question, which
Continue.
I do want to deal with those things. But what I want to talk about is there's layer and layer and layer and layer. These are not simple binary questions and binary answers. There's different trade-offs. So as we move towards more and more renewable energy, which we must, energy production, the energy density gets lower and lower. So we are going to deal with lower and lower grade and take up more and more real estate for that same amount of energy. It's not a value judgment against it. It's to say we need to be aware of that. So the more important thing, the first thing we need to do is to reduce our energy use, and then to deliver it more efficiently, and then to produce it renewably. Okay? So we need to do all of those in that continuum, but frankly, the first thing we need to do, regardless of the energy source, is to reduce use, or improve efficiency and reduce use. But let's get back to your questions about nuclear.
Well, this is about general sources. Which, if it can be nuclear, if or not, what sources do you think that we should support more? Like, which do you think need growth and need funding?
So I would like to see nuclear as a transitional strategy, and I'm cautious about suggesting that because, we may end up making a stupid decision and saying, oh, well, that was so easy, let's just do that indefinitely, which isn't a really good idea. But I would say transitional 20, 40, maybe 60-year strategy to get us to the point where we can be way more efficient on the consumption end, and so demand less, but also develop renewables more fully. Because I think the urgency of the global impact of combustion is so great we need to get away from that. We need to stop burning stuff. We need to reduce our use of fossil fuels fast, but I'm anxious about using nuclear energy indefinitely and forever, thinking that that is also a panacea. It's not. But the energy density does lend itself to small spots. When I was in school, more than 30 years ago, we were already talking about what's called inherently safe designs. Things that instead of you operating and needing to be continuously active to operate, if the entire plant staff just walks away and abandons the thing will naturally shut down. Or if you yank the plug and take away all energy source to the nuclear plant, you could design it such that it just naturally shuts down. It needs essentially stimulus from an energy input and people actively working to keep it running, so it won't either go prompt critical, which is basically what we call a meltdown, or other things like that would be catastrophic. So some of the events in the history of the nuclear power industry, I'm sure you've heard about either Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island or Fukushima Daiichi, where we either got very close to, or part of the reactor core melted, or all of the reactor core melted. Each of those plants required active involvement from humans and active systems to work, which I think is naive engineering design, to keep the thing safe. There are ways that we've already developed that we can design nuclear plants that simply go, they are naturally passive, and they will fail in a shutdown mode as opposed to fail in a greater and greater, more excited mode, right, in a higher energetic state mode.
Are you familiar with small modular reactors?
Yes.
Um,
In concept, I can't name all the designs
No.
off the top of my head, but in concept, yes.
And what do you think about them in context of like nuclear energy and its progress?
I really like the concept. There are trade-offs, right? So the nice thing about having one big thing in one spot is it's easy to figure out where it is, and it's easy to control, and it's easy to manage, and it takes fewer people, and you can pay more attention to it. The downside about having a whole mess of little things sort of scattered all over the place is you may lose track of them. There's more people's fingers in the pie. They're harder to manage collectively, but you've distributed the use and you've distributed the risk, so the scale of the risk is smaller. So we need the rules and the protective, both physical as well as administrative controls in place before doing that. The one thing I think we should do, though, is test a whole mess of them, standardize on one, and say, you know, I'm deeply sorry about constraining your creativity, but we're going to license this one, or we're going to license these two. And one of the problems in the nuclear industry when I was in it was that the rules kept changing. They became more and more and more expensive just to maintain the power plant that you had already bought. And that was tremendously difficult, especially if you're a shareholder or an investor, to say, wait, this industry has no financial predictability, so it's very hard to plan and build. What you'd like is certainty of licensing and certainty of design. So there are ways to not constrain everybody's creativity. But what we'll say is there's two paths to get the nuclear power plant that you'd like to build. There's two paths that we'd like to offer you. One is there's two designs. You must stick exactly with these designs, no changes. You can build this on your property and do that under these rules, and you know that you'll get permits to do it. All right, so your shareholders or investors have certainty that as long as you build it, you can get the return on investment. The other path is you can go and be as creative as you want, and you can come up with your own design, and that will be considered by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and we'll
40
offer
years
the,
later.
we'll offer the opportunity through the exact same path that we offer you today to get it licensed and permitted and approved and that kind of stuff. But we need enough of the inherently safe, small modular reactors, permitted, blessed, approved, and then not changed. Like, you may not mess with any of the design. You must build exactly this, and, you know, yes, there are incremental changes you could make to make it better, but we're not gonna allow that. We're gonna keep it whatever we agree on, and then it's all very predictable, and that would allow it to go forward.
I think the small could work with what you're talking about with the cogeneration of.
Well, yes, exactly, and that, I've been batting that idea around with some of my peers in the industry, saying, you know, I would love to have the aft end of a nuclear reactor, nuclear submarine. I don't need the propulsion systems, I don't need the weapon systems, I just need the reactor room. But I would make it twice as efficient, because they're using it just for the power. Either the thrust to move the submarine forward, or the generating power to make the electronics on the ship work. I would also use the thermal waste. They have the entire ocean as their heat sink, so they just reject whatever heat very easily. But I would use that heat on campus in a productive way, right? So so essentially I'd either need half the size reactor, or I could make it last twice as long, but maybe not change the fuel for except every 10 or 15 years. So we could probably, if it were inherently safe, passively fail safe, we could do make design constraints where I couldn't physically, and a terrorist or someone with bad intent couldn't steal it or maliciously take the contents or whatever. We'd have administrative control, so even I couldn't get into that and monitor it. And I wouldn't even have to change the fuel except every 10 or 15 years. So that might be a once a decade activity that we could plan well in advance. It's doable. We have the technology. Most of the saving the planet stuff that we want to do isn't about new technology. It's about rules. It's really about rules. It's really about giving permission, and not unfettered, no constraints, but it's about figuring out how do we do this in a way that allows us to go forward in a safe and thoughtful way. All right, that's when I've meditated on this for the past 2-3 decades. That's kind of what I've come up with, and especially the most recent years. A lot of the sustainability issues that we're facing, I don't need a whole lot of new technology, maybe a little bit, but that's not really where the cutting edge is. The cutting edge is on figuring out the rules, on figuring out what rules we can all apply and agree on.
What I think the